Grace thought marrying into a wealthy family was a dream come true, until her wedding night takes a deadly turn. Forced into a twisted game of hide and seek, she soon realizes her in-laws aren't looking for fun. They're hunting her. Trapped in their mansion with no way out, Grace must fight to survive until dawn or be their next sacrifice.
Hail Satan!
In 1989, inside the Loot Domes mansion, young brothers Daniel and Alex run through the halls as a wounded man, Charles, chases after them. Daniel quickly hides Alex in a closet before Charles reaches him. Desperate, Charles begs Daniel for help, but instead, Daniel calls out to his family. Moments later, the family appears wearing ceremonial masks and robes. Helene, Charles's wife, tries to protect him, but he is shot with a spear gun. The family then drags Charles into a room and kills him. 30 years later, Alex is about to marry a woman named Grace. She's nervous, but excited to become part of his wealthy family, whose fortune comes from their gaming empire. Before the ceremony, the couple takes photos with Alex's relatives. Daniel is there with his wife, Charity, who openly admits she married him for his family's money. Their father, Tony, clearly disapproves of Grace, but Helene is even colder, glaring at her with pure disdain. However, Alex and Daniel's mother, Becky, is more supportive, telling Grace that Alex's, in her opinion, is all that matters. Soon after, the wedding begins, and Grace and Alex are officially married. After the wedding, Grace and Alex try to have a private moment, but they are interrupted by Helene, who sternly reminds Alex that he must join the family for an important tradition. Alex then explains to Grace that every new member of the Loot Domes family must take part in a game at midnight. Grace asks what kind of game they have to play, but Alex says he doesn't know. It's just an important tradition because their family's fortune comes from games. They then join the rest of the family, now including Alex and Daniel's sister, Emily, her husband, Fitch Bradley, and their two sons, Georgie and Gabe. As everyone gathers around a table, a maid named Clara reads a bedtime story to the boys. Tony then explains the tradition, saying it began with his great-grandfather Victor, who made a deal with a mysterious man named Mr. LaBelle. In return for immense wealth, Victor had to uphold his part of the bargain, which included a special box that determines the game. The family hands a box to Grace, and she draws a card. Charity mentions she once got chess, while Fitch got Old Maid. But when Grace pulls hide and seek, the entire room goes silent. Grace asks who hides and who seeks. Tony explained that she can hide anywhere inside the house, and tells Grace that to win, she must stay hidden until dawn, which doesn't sound fun to her at all. As she goes to hide, the family arms themselves, most with guns, while Helene takes an axe and Fitch gets a crossbow, ready to find Grace. Grace hides inside a dumbwaiter, unaware of the real danger. Meanwhile, Alex refuses to take part and stays behind, but once the family heads out to find Grace, he sneaks away to warn her. Charity notices him leaving. Grace eventually steps out of the dumbwaiter and wanders through the mansion. Alex finds her, quickly covering her mouth and telling her to stay quiet. Nearby, Clara searches for Georgie, who has gotten out of bed. Suddenly, a gunshot rings out. Clara's face is blown off. Emily, thinking she had shot Grace, realizes her mistake in horror. The rest of the family, Tony, Helene, Daniel, and Becky, rush in to handle Clara's body, while Grace sits frozen in shock. As Alex pulls her into another room, Emily comes and takes some white powder to make the game more interesting. Meanwhile, in another room, Alex finally tells her the truth. In this version of hide and seek, the family believes they must hunt and kill Grace before dawn, or they will die instead. He admits he didn't tell her before because he was afraid she'd leave him, but now he promises to help her escape. Alex tells Grace to run straight down the hallway until she reaches the kitchen while he heads to the security room to unlock all the doors and help her escape. Once Alex leaves, Grace swaps her heels for tennis shoes and rips the bottom of her dress to move more easily. As she tries to sneak out, she's immediately spotted by Tony, Helene, and Daniel. They attempt to grab her, but Emily, hyped up on coke, starts firing wildly and completely misses. Grace takes the chance to escape, and the family now knows she's aware of the deadly game. Daniel finds her next, but since he doesn't care about the hunt, he lets her go before calling out to the others. Meanwhile, the family regroups to come up with a new plan. Just then, another maid, Tina, rushes in to tell Tony she saw Grace. Before she can finish, Emily, now wielding Fitch's crossbow, accidentally shoots her in the head. As Tina groans in pain, Helene coldly finishes her off by chopping off her head. Becky then suggests using the security cameras to track Grace, but Tony refuses, insisting they must follow the rules of tradition. But at the end, Becky manages to convince them and sends Daniel and Helen to turn on camera and find Alex as he is not playing the game properly. Meanwhile, Grace finds a rifle and quickly takes it for her security. She hides in the kitchen while Alex works on disabling the locks and turning on the cameras. Just then, the butler, Stevens, walks in to make tea. He hears her loading the rifle and quickly spots her. Grace tries to shoot him, but he smirks and reveals that the ammo is just for display. Thinking fast, she smashes a teapot over his face and escapes. Meanwhile, Alex successfully unlocks all the doors and windows, allowing Grace to get outside. But before he can do more, Tony and Daniel find him in the control room. Tony attacks, and though Alex fights back, Daniel talks him down, giving Tony the perfect chance to knock Alex out. They drag him to his bedroom and handcuff him to keep him from interfering. Outside, Grace carefully moves across the rooftop while overhearing Tony and Helene talking. They discuss how Alex has always rejected their family's deadly tradition, being the good son. However, Helene believes he will eventually accept it, just as she did after her husband Charles was killed. She admits she fought against it first, but now thinks she should have killed him herself. In her mind, Alex will soon realize his place in the family. Grace is close to escaping when she's spotted by the third maid, Dora, who is hiding in the dumbwaiter. Dora tries to call for the family, but in her panic, she accidentally triggers the dumbwaiter's mechanism, causing it to slam shut and crush her. With no time to waste, Grace runs off again. She makes it outside and runs to the stable, where she sees Georgie. Thinking he might help her, she approaches him, only for him to suddenly pull out a gun and shoot a hole through her hand. In shock and pain, she instinctively punches him in the face, knocking him out. Startled by a nearby goat, she stumbles and falls into the goat pit, a gruesome dumping ground for dead goats and past victims. As she tries to climb out, the ladder beneath her starts to break. She manages to reach the top, but in the process, a nail goes straight through the hole in her wounded hand. Gritting through the pain, she pulls herself up and tears a piece of her dress to use as a bandage. Desperate, she runs to the front gate and forces it open. Spotting a passing car, she frantically tries to flag it down, but the driver coldly ignores her and speeds away. Before she can find another way out, Stevens catches up to her and tries to subdue her. Grace fights back, using part of her dress to strangle him. Thinking he's dead, she steals his car and speeds off, unaware that Stevens is still alive. Becky orders Daniel and Emily to dump the maids' bodies in the goat pit, as everyone agrees they've caused more trouble than they're worth. Daniel is growing increasingly frustrated with his family's actions, while Emily insists on following tradition to keep her children safe. Meanwhile, Grace speeds away in Stevens' car and calls customer service for help. She reaches an agent named Justin, but things take a turn when he realizes the car was reported stolen. Instead of helping, Justin remotely shuts the car down, leaving Grace stranded. Moments later, Stevens catches up to her and tranquilizes her. As he drives back to the mansion, he video chats with the family to update them on Grace's capture. Feeling cocky, he plays classical music on the radio and doesn't notice Grace waking up, but the family does. They try to warn him, but before he realizes what's happening, Grace kicks him twice in the head, causing the car to flip over into a field. Stevens is killed in the crash, but Grace survives. She crawls out of the wreckage, only to be found by Daniel. Though he seems conflicted, he tells her he can't betray his family, then knocks her out and drags her back to the mansion. Becky visits Alex in his room, hoping to convince him that, despite his love for Grace, he will have to support his family's tradition. Alex, however, warns her that if anything happens to Grace, he will kill her. Meanwhile, the family places Grace on an altar to begin the ritual sacrifice to Mr. LaBelle. They pass around a chalice and drink, but before Tony can finish the ritual, they all start vomiting violently. Daniel had secretly poisoned their drinks to weaken them. He quickly frees Grace and tries to help her escape, but they are caught by Charity. Realizing Daniel has betrayed the family, she shoots him in the throat. Grace struggles with Charity, managing to take her gun, but it's empty, so she pistol whips her unconscious. Grace tries to help Daniel, but he tells her to go. At the same time, Alex breaks free from his cuffs and rushes to his dying brother, trying to save him, but it's too late. Meanwhile, Tony attacks Grace, but she fights back, smashing a lantern over his head. The impact causes it to fall, setting the curtains on fire. Becky then ambushes Grace, narrowly missing her with an arrow before attempting to strangle her. Grace yanks the tablecloth, causing Mr. LaBelle's box to fall into her hands. She uses it as a weapon, knocking Becky off and then beating her to death with it. Moments later, Alex enters and sees the aftermath. Realizing that Grace will never forgive him, he makes a shocking decision. He betrays her and hands her over to his family. As the ritual continues, the family holds Grace down while Alex prepares to plunge the dagger into her. At the last moment, she claws Helene's hand, breaking free just as the blade pierces her shoulder instead. Grace scrambles off the table, gripping the dagger and screaming at the family. Then, they notice the sun has risen. It's too late. For a moment, nothing happens, and they believe they've escaped their fate. But as Helene raises an axe to kill Grace anyway, she suddenly explodes into a bloody mess. Panic spreads as Fitch is next, followed by a pleading Charity. Emily tries to flee with Georgie and Gabe, but they all burst as well. Tony, insisting he followed the rules, is reduced to pulp in an instant. Left alone, Alex desperately tries to convince Grace to forgive him, but she coldly hands him back her ring and says she wants a divorce, and he also bursts in peace. Seconds later, the fire spreads throughout the mansion, and for a brief moment, Grace spots Mr. LaBelle's spirit watching from his chair. He gives her a nod of approval before vanishing. Grace steps outside, drenched in blood, and sits on the mansion steps. As the police and paramedics arrive, an officer approaches and asks what happened. Taking a drag from her cigarette, she simply responds, "In-laws."
In-laws.
In this way, movie ends here. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more interesting movie recaps.